At 2:17 a.m., on the Crimean Peninsula, a 38-car steel ghost is slicing through the steppe darkness at a precise 47 miles per hour with every light extinguished, crawling through the night in total blackout. Inside it sits more than 1.76 million pounds of 152 artillery shells and tens of thousands of gallons of diesel fuel. Think of it like this. The Russian tanks and cannons on the Zaporizhia front are starving monsters, and this train is their only pizza delivery guy. Without it, those Russian guns become nothing more than expensive iron pipes lying in the dew outside the trenches. In just 30 minutes, this giant mass of metal will pass over a strategic viaduct at mile 29. But at this exact moment, Voronov, the sergeant driving the train, has no idea that his two workhorses were infected with a pathogen and stopped fully obeying him hours ago. Meanwhile, in Kiev, they are waiting for the moment to turn this multi-million-dollar shipment into a mountain of ash. The rules of war can sound bitter, but they are brutally real. The bigger the machine, the thicker the armor, the more sophisticated its weakness becomes, if you know exactly where to poke. You do not need an army to tear down a fortress. Sometimes, you only need one person to step in at the right shift. And tonight, that person is an SBU mole, with a spotless profile, carefully built over many months. The train had just gone through a short maintenance session at Simferopol station, the kind of check everyone treats like a formality to get over with. And in those exact 40 minutes, he did not plant a bomb like in the movies. He worked like a real mechanic. 4 small-shaped charges were attached to the most sensitive points in the engine rooms at both ends of the train, then left silent, waiting for a radio signal, persistent enough to cut through interference and strike at exactly the right second. But the most cunning part came after that. In the final few minutes, he plugged a small module into the auxiliary system, not to control the train, but to make every critical reaction half a beat slower. It sounds insignificant, but in a system that lives by the second, that half beat is enough to turn in time into too late. So the train still runs under Russian hands, still taking orders like normal. The only problem is that it is no longer completely obedient. Like a car whose brakes still work, but always bite a fraction too late when you need them most. Under the chassis of the third car, a GPS beacon no bigger than a matchbox sends out regular signals to satellites so that, from Kiev, they can track every move of this block of steel. When he left the station, he was only 11 minutes away from the nearest FSB patrol team, close enough for his heart to hammer faster than normal, but still far enough to let a smile break across his face, the kind of smile only people who have just escaped a massive gamble can understand. At 1:30 a.m. in Simferopol, the train begins to roll into the thick darkness. Only the sound of metal grinding against rail, steady and cold, like the heartbeat of a machine too large to stop politely. At the front, a 2TE-116U locomotive pulls, while at the rear, another one pushes. And these two iron horses do not simply move cargo from point A to point B, they control how the entire mass of steel behind them behaves, from smooth acceleration to violent jerking, from steady motion to how it reacts when forced to brake. Meanwhile, 14 miles to the north, a Russian military convoy is moving through the dark. 4 Ural 4,320 trucks carrying ammunition, 2 Gaz Tiger vehicles escorting at both ends. Slow, steady, routine, like every other transport night for months, forming a logistics network that looks solid but is actually very easy to deceive. The men riding in those vehicles have no reason to be suspicious. This route runs every night. It is so familiar, it has become boring. And tonight, nothing signals a difference, except for one fact. Ukraine launched 3 FPV drones before the convoy even rolled off its starting point. At exactly 1:52 a.m. they came lunging in from the east, flying so low they nearly skimmed the asphalt itself, their electric motors too quiet to give any useful warning. The soldier in the lead Gaz Tiger was no amateur. He caught the tiny black shape on his thermal screen just as it closed to roughly 656 feet from the vehicle, enough time to shout a warning and swing the machine gun barrel toward it. The first burst of gunfire ripped through the dark, and FPV number 1 was shot down right on the road, shattering into carbon fragments and wire before it could touch the target. Then came a second of silence, followed by shouting over the radio. They thought they had handled the threat. That was the final mistake of the night. Because while the convoy's full attention was locked forward, where FPV number 1 had just been killed, number 2 had already slipped to the right flank and came in from a completely different angle. It struck Ural number 3, exactly where the 120 mortar rounds were stacked, before any gun could swing back. The third FPV did not need to do anything else, because from that moment, physics took over completely. The pillar of fire from the M18 was tall enough to be seen from Voronov's cabin. The radio inside Locomotive 1's cockpit exploded like a marketplace. Simferopol station, rail posts along the line, quick response units, all talking over one another at once, to the point that it took several seconds to figure out who was even speaking to whom. Then the Simferopol dispatcher's voice cut through the chaos, concise and cold. Attack on M18, Ukrainian drones confirmed, operating northbound. All lines raise alert. Sergeant Voronov, seated inside the cockpit, looked toward the flare on the horizon, then glanced back at the radar screen which still glowed a calm green. He completed the story in his own head. Ukraine is hitting the roads tonight. The rail line is still safe. It is a classic rule of battlefield psychology. The human brain cannot maintain maximum alertness against two threats at once when one of them has just been confirmed as burning somewhere else. He picked up the radio and reported to Simferopol. Rail line normal. Continuing journey. The 7 FSB soldiers aboard the train heard the same transmission. For a few seconds they sat up straighter, hands brushing their weapons, then slowly relaxed when the news from the M18 confirmed it was an isolated raid unrelated to the rail line. And that is how the devastating strike on the M18 highway became the passport for this train to continue rolling deeper into a death trap. Simferopol dispatched more reinforcements to the road, leaving the 38-car train to push onward toward mile 29 under a fatal blanket of complacency. Think of it like a magician. A thief makes you stare at his swirling left hand while his right hand quietly steals your wallet in plain sight. At 2:41 a.m., the train had entered its cruising rhythm, like a massive beast that had found its stride, stable, heavy, and most importantly, with almost no graceful way to stop anymore. 2 minutes later, everything began to crack apart because of a detail so small that, on any normal night, nobody would have cared. Inside the command car, the electromagnetic monitoring system suddenly caught a faint band of interference, the kind of signal you would normally ignore, like hearing a tiny click in a car engine and telling yourself it is probably nothing. But Voronov was not that kind of man. 8 years on this line had taught him one simple truth: something strange at 2 a.m. is usually not your friend. He set his teacup down, his eyes left his phone, his voice hardened. Full band scan. Active jamming. At once the train wrapped itself in a layer of electromagnetic fog, smothering every weak signal around it. If you have ever tried to catch Wi-Fi in a room where 3 routers are screaming over one another, you understand the feeling. In Kiev, the screen began to flicker. The beacon signal faded, not gone completely, but enough to make the entire control room sit upright. Someone muttered, half reporting and half cursing, "They're jamming." The person seated in the right corner did not even look up. Hands still moving across the keyboard, steady and calm, he said, "Let it go." Less than 2 miles south of the train, in a dry ditch beside the tracks, 3 people who had lain motionless for 3 hours were waiting for exactly that sentence. Then, out of the darkness of the steppe, 12 Beaver drones surged upward at once. This was a swarm system with a division of labor more disciplined than a Delta Force stack. Each drone carried radar reflectors, corner reflectors designed to make them appear on enemy screens as large and bright as a Su-27 fighter or a cruise missile. This is the digital clone trick. The result is simple. The Pantsir's computer begins hallucinating. Instead of seeing 12 cheap drones, the Russian operator sees as many as 50 points of light dancing, overlapping, multiplying, turning the sky into a chaotic chessboard. The 30 cannon barrels started spitting fire wildly at the phantom targets. 3 minutes passed. 5 drones remained. Most of the Pantsir's ammunition was still being wasted into empty air while the real main character of the operation was still approaching from the opposite direction. In the middle of the red-hot traces tearing across the sky, a Baba Yaga drone, acting as the mother drone, quietly appeared from the south. It did not choose a flashy path. It glided just a few feet above the ground, brushing the steppe grass, sinking into ground clutter so completely that it disappeared beneath the defender's eyes. Behind it came the ace card, a super-thin fiber-optic cable, miles long, connected directly back to the control station. Think of it like an immortal fishing line. While the Russian jamming system was trying to smother all radio waves, this wire carried cold, exact commands that no radar could corrupt. Tonight, the mother drone was not playing the role of a bomb-carrying assassin. It carried a specially encrypted signal relay. Its mission was to become the master key that would open the explosive box already planted on the train. But to detonate the RDX embedded aboard that train, the mother drone had to enter the death zone. It had to stay at exactly 300 feet, close enough for the signal to punch through the train's local jamming, but still far enough not to be turned into ash when 1.76 million pounds of artillery shells detonated. In Kyiv, the engineers' eyes were locked on the beacon screen. The clock ticked 1 second at a time. The signal flickered, wavering under the electronic jamming. One slow beat, and the entire plan could collapse. Hands froze on keyboards, breathing shortened, hearts pounded like they wanted out of their chests. Every yard the train moved forward, every second of delay on the screen, tightened an invisible pincer between two poles of a life-and-death gamble. The train was now around mile 24, still outside the sweet detonation zone, like standing just outside the edge of a Wi-Fi signal, needing only a few more steps to reach full bars. Outside, the Pantsir had just shot down 4 more jamming drones. 3 remained. Can you see the pincer starting to close? One side racing against distance, the other racing against quantity, and in the middle, a block of steel that does not care who is right or wrong. Meanwhile, Voronov did not need data to know that something was wrong. He pushed the throttle a little further. The train roared, and that tiny module quietly did its work. Voronov was now one step behind reality. The system was still telling him it was not moving fast enough, still persuading him to push just a little harder, and it was that little harder that carried this train into a moment far greater than a little mistake. Then a serious risk appeared. A sudden powerful gust tore through the canyon at mile 29 and overstretched the fiber-optic cable. Not far away, sweat ran down the controller's temples as every millimeter of joystick movement had to be adjusted to keep the glass thread from snapping. One wrong beat, 1 second of complacency, and the cable breaks, and this entire campaign becomes nothing more than a sad story told over a cup of tea. In Kiev, the control room held its breath. The countdown clock showed only seconds before the train reached the weakest span of the bridge. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the fire command went through the fiber-optic cable. An encrypted electrical pulse from the mother drone slipped through the jamming layer and touched the pre-installed explosive blocks, and in the first moment after the command, nothing happened. Silence. The kind of silence that makes you wonder whether you just bet everything and lost. The train still lunged forward, steady as ever. Steel wheels grinding against the rails like a clock that never misses a beat. Then, inside the front locomotive, an orange light burst out from deep inside the metal mass. Not loud, but violent in the way only something suppressed for too long can be. 1 heartbeat later, the rear of the train answered with a savage jolt that tore the tail section apart. Those were not 2 explosions for spectacle. They were deliberate power. In the first second, the train lost traction. In the next, it lost its self-braking capability. And from that moment on, congratulations, no one is driving the train anymore. Physics has taken the controls. And physics does not care whether you have a plan C. The FSB team reacted instantly, with the speed of men trained for exactly this kind of nightmare. A technician barked a clipped order, and the group rushed to the coupling area between the cars. The 40-mile-per-hour night wind whipped their faces like knives, but they did not hesitate. 1 man opened the car door, 2 more helped shove bodies through, and all 7 jumped from the moving train using the exact golden jump technique they had drilled again and again in special training. They hit the soft step ground beside the tracks, rolled once to absorb the impact, then rose intact, maybe with a few cuts, and a military sentence waiting for them later. Ahead, the viaduct appeared in the darkness, a structure built to carry a steady load, not catch a block of steel rushing forward in a state of amnesia. Locomotive number 1 struck the bridge after its internal structure had already been weakened by the blast. The impact did not produce an instant Hollywood explosion. Instead, it funneled force directly into the weakest point, like a punch landing on a joint. The girder snapped, not loudly, not theatrically, just fast, cold, and final. The first 3 cars lost support and dragged the rest of the train with them. The following cars piled up in a domino wave of metal crashing into metal, energy compressing into energy, with nowhere left to go. So it began to build and then release, in the only way it could. The artillery shells and diesel in the rear did not explode all at once. They went up gradually, beat by beat, each blast lifting the pillar of fire higher and brighter until the Crimean night sky was ripped open by a tower of light that people miles away could not help but look up to see. By the next morning, the map was missing more than a train. It was missing an entire section of bridge. The Simferopol-Melitopol line had been cut open like a suffocated blood vessel. And from that moment on, everything behind it began to slow down, fall out of rhythm, and grow more vulnerable. And that is how Ukraine plays this game. There is no need to destroy everything. No need to hit the loudest place. Just find the right weakness, choose the right second, and make Russia miss exactly 1 beat. After that, let physics do the rest. And physics has never stood on the side of the slower responder. Somewhere else, thousands of miles away, another team may already be watching another road, another bridge, another night. And in that world, war is no longer a contest of who has more. It is a contest of who understands systems better, who finds the weakness first, and who strikes it with greater precision. Bye for now.